On your Toxic Positivity Friday edition of Locked On Raptors, the Raptors are back. They play tonight, and the stretch run is upon us. I'm very excited about it. I'll tell you why. Plus, a couple of prospects who have me real excited about this year's top 5.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey! What's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, February the 21st, and I am your host, Sean Woodley. Been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can follow my work over on Blue Sky. You can also find the show on Instagram, and you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. Link in the description of the podcast. Great place. Come hang out, talk ball among friends. You can also, of course, subscribe for free to the daily Locked On Raptors newsletter. You'll get a Toxic Positivity Friday post in there from me today. You get Michael Shear every Thursday, basketball poetry. Katie Heindel, fresh off her travels from All-Star Weekend. You have her League at Large pieces 4 days a week. It's a great thing. And again, it's 100% free. So please go subscribe, be a pal. It's very much appreciated. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers, you got $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Go check them out. And we will get things rolling here again on a Toxic Positivity Friday, the day where we put up the blinders to all the bad stuff going on in Toronto Raptors hoops and just talk about the good. And frankly, not a lot of bad going on right now. It's been a while since the Raptors played basketball, and I'm just excited to be back in it, baby. They take on the Miami Heat tonight. And we're going to get into why I'm pretty stoked about the final stretch of this season, even though it's probably going to include a lot of engineered losing. Later on, we'll get into a couple of those guys that the engineered losing is all geared towards, a couple of prospects who I think are making claims to be pretty clear top 5 guys for me, at least in this year's draft. We're going to talk about VJ Edgecombe and Khaman Maluach coming up a little bit later on as well. A couple guys I'm very into, especially Maluach. Man, I'm so in. Either way, let's get to it. The final third of the season is upon us. And look, this is not a feeling I felt last year. Even though the Raptors had kind of assembled a sensible team and were kind of in the midst of their February run of playing real basketball, last year was a drag, man. It was exhausting. The first half of last season was just constant state of dread and worry and uncertainty of what was going to come next, who was going to be on the team in a week, 2 weeks, a month's time. And it sapped a lot of the joy out of last season. I'm not going to lie. Like, last year is the least fun I've ever had covering the Toronto Raptors on this podcast. And I was there for the Tampa Tank season. That was at least like a thing that kept me occupied while the world was falling to hell around us. The world's also falling to hell these days too, but this team is actually fun and interesting, and I think worth investing the time into. And I'm just excited to see how things play out down the stretch of this season. This is my Toxic Positivity rant to start off today. Like, I am just like ready to embrace whatever is going to come out of the last 27 games here, the final third of the schedule. We know that the back part of the schedule is really loaded with a bunch of horrible, no good teams. They're probably going to pick up some wins. That's probably going to stress people out. But I just think the overall tone and tenor of this season has been generally pretty optimistic, pretty happy-go-lucky, pretty Hakuna Matata. I think there's been a lot of really good stuff going on, and I'm just excited to see how that can kind of continue down the stretch. The Raptors are fun bad, like successfully fun bad. This was my declared goal at the start of the season, was more than anything, be a bad team that is enjoyable. Be a bad team that you don't feel dread thinking about tuning in for 2.5 hours on a random night. Be a team that doesn't make me lean on the all possessions recap of games the next morning because I simply don't want to spend the time watching the full game in real time because I knew it was going to be another 20, 30-point loss. This team has like a genuine likability to it. There is stuff to glom onto and feel excited about even when they're losing games. And even when they lose games, most of the time, it's pretty competitive. Yes, there was that December swoon where things were really ugly for a second there. It kind of all built up to that nasty franchise worst loss to the Celtics on New Year's Eve. They flipped a page through the new year. They've been a wonderfully competent team ever since then. Before that December swoon, they were like the most fun 7-15 team you've ever seen. I think for the most part, they've really maintained that identity that they kind of carved out in the early part of the season throughout the year. And down the stretch, I think we're going to see a lot more of the stuff that kind of made, yes, a lot of the losses early on. Like they lost a ton of games, there's no doubt, but like the stuff that made that stretch fun and enjoyable and worth tuning into every night, I think we're going to see more of that down the stretch here as well. Like this is the formula that got them to that 7-15 start, more or less, right? It was they had their core guys and then they played a bunch of rookies for like a quarter or 30% of the minutes of the team, and they lost games because rookies lose games. We're probably going to see even more rookies in terms of like the share of the minutes down the stretch. We're going to see a ton of Jamal Shed, a ton of Jacoby Walter, a ton of Jonathan Mobo now that he's back from the 905 and playing pretty well. We're going to see Jamison Battle, I'm sure. Like those guys sprinkled in with the guys who really matter, the core figures of this team. That's what's going to make this worth watching down the stretch. And they're still probably going to lose a lot of games because that's what happens. Even in these games where it's going to be extremely movable force against a very movable object like that, or extremely stoppable force versus very movable object. Like those games are going to be fun because you're going to get to see little glimpses of the future. This is the thing that last year just did not have. Last year was miserable. Last year was guys who are just not in like going to be parts of the future, non-NBA players. I think 14 of the 30 players who played for the Raptors last season are not in the NBA this season. It was a grim scene, and it just didn't leave you with any kind of kernels of future hope. It was really Grady Dick and the few moments where RJ Barrett and Emmanuel quickly played down the stretch that gave you some optimism, but for the most part, that team was a total drag, playing guys who were just not going to be around at all beyond the end of the season. And this year it's totally different. Even if they are trying to lose games, they're trying to do it with a little bit of a developmental lean, which is great. Like this is all you ask for. If you're going to be bad, at least do it with some dignity, do it with some nobility. Like don't just kind of sit down all of your guys because it's the right thing to do tanking wise. Like I don't think we're going to see mass benchings of Scotty Barnes and Emmanuel Quickly and RJ Barrett and Jakob Pertl down the stretch. We'll see when Brandon Ingram gets in. Obviously, that thing is, he's still going to be out a while. There's no timeline for his return at the moment per what came out of practice yesterday. Like, it's still going to be some time here for Brandon Ingram, and we might not see him very much at all. Again, that can kind of maybe be a feature, not a bug, if you're really looking at the lottery stuff. But overall, like I just think because they have so many guys they can kind of throw in who are bound to lose minutes just because that's what rookies do, they can afford to play their most important guys, get them time together. I think watching Quickly and Barnes play together down the stretch, there have been some nice signs in their recent games. I think that's going to be a thing really worth investing your sort of emotional well-being into down the stretch of the season, even if the result is not wins. And I just guess like this has been a great season for those who like don't just derive joy from championship contention, right? Like I like to watch fun basketball. That's really where I'm at in all of this. I want to watch interesting, fun basketball. I want to watch teams that are trying. If they lose, whatever, I don't care. If they're actually giving a damn and there's stuff to look forward to and there's, ground being laid for what's to come, I can get on board with that. I'm not a fan of just like the sellout, we're shutting down our guys at the 40 game mark and just wasting away for the rest of the season the way the Jazz do, or the way the Blazers have done in recent years, or the way the Thunder did, frankly, during the first couple of years they had Shea after getting rid of Chris Paul. Like, I don't like that. I think that's lame. I think that's anti-entertainment. I think that's anti-competitive. I think what the Raptors are going through right now is a little bit different. I think it's got a bit of a different tone to it. And I also love, we heard this out of practice yesterday too, the players do not seem resigned to just going to tank. Like, I think, that's what you want to hear, right? Like, Scotty Barnes was asked about fans caring more about the lottery than the actual games. And I thought Scotty's response was fantastic. It was like, yeah, like, I don't care about that. That's not where my head's at. That's great. That's wonderful. Like, more of that. Again, your head can be in the right place and you can still lose. That's probably going to happen for this team down the stretch. But I do think there's still going to be stuff that, again, it sort of lays the sort of seeds of what's to come down the line. And, if you're kind of playing competitive ball, even if you're losing games, I think there's only good to come out of that, right? It's just, yeah, a great season for like the notion that not every season needs to be about contending, that every season is its own kind of chapter in a very long form story that every team is telling. And it does feel like there's a ground floor element to this Raptors team that wasn't there last year. To me, this has been like the most fun Raptors season since pretty obviously the most fun Raptors season since the playoff season in 2021-22. The last couple of years were a drag, the one where they go 41-41 with the fake run down the stretch and the Jakob Poeltl trade that made everyone mad. Not a terribly fun season. The first 50 games of that season were a nightmare. The last 20-something games of that season didn't feel terribly real or sustainable or something building towards a longer-term path to contention. I do think that is there with this team. And I think the Brandon Ingram trade has kind of reinvigorated that feeling too, that, hey, like this is not going to be some long-term, laying down in the mud at the bottom of the league for years and years and years, waiting for the lottery to save you. The Raptors kind of took the bull by the horns a little bit, made the Brandon Ingram trade. They're in a position to get a high pick still. And I like what's going on right now. Shout out to a fun team that's not making me feel existential dread. We love it. Enjoy it, right? Have fun with the little gains. Have fun with the Jacoby Walter pops that are going to come. Have fun with Jonathan Mobo when he makes a big defensive stop. Have fun if Scotty Barnes and Manuel quickly, play really well and still lose a game. Like that's what this season is about now. I think you have license to not live and die with every result. Obviously, if they lose more games, it's better for their lottery standings. And we'll get into it in a second here. There's a couple guys who make it feel like being top 5 would be pretty darn sweet, but it's also not the end of the world. And the draft never goes as you expect it will. And if you're 6th or 7th in the draft order, you're probably going to get a nice player there too. Maybe even one of the guys we're about to talk about. Like, again, it's Hakuna Matata time. Enjoy the last 27 games. Don't make everything a referendum on what is good or not good about the team or the coach or the franchise or whatever. Enjoy some low stakes hoop where some fun stuff's going to happen and some losses are going to pile up, and it's all okay in the end because they're set up to be a better team next year. And that's very cool. Anyway, off the soapbox, we're going to come back on the other side and get into a couple prospects who I'm quite digging of late as I ramp up my deep dive into the draft. We're going to talk about VJ Edgecombe and Khaman Maluach coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get a 50% bonus off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. Few advantages of this deal. You get the game day feast after each epic 50-point performance. Celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burger from your favorite spot delivered straight to your door. You got late night cravings. Maybe you need some lunch on the go, whatever it might be. You can go and find it at DoorDash. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. And if you can't tip your drivers, you can't afford to eat out. So tip them, damn it. Back at it here on your, what the hell day is it? Friday. It's Toxic Positivity Friday, of course. How did I forget the day? Edition of Locked On Raptors. We're doing a little draft talk, baby. We'll get into Khaman Maluach in the final segment. Let's first talk about VJ Edgecombe. People in these parts familiar with 6'5" guards at a Baylor. Jacoby Walter this past year. VJ Edgecombe filling in that spot on that Baylor team this year. Very different player. We're going to get into why, but he's a guy who's had himself a pretty nice couple of months, kind of bounced back from a first couple months of the season at Baylor where his shot wasn't falling. He just didn't look like he had a ton of offensive juice, looked mostly just like a defensive specialist type with limited offensive upside. The athleticism and the shooting have kind of, turned things around here for him. And I'm a big fan. VJ Edgecombe, 6'5" guard, plays at Baylor, was on the Bahamas national team last summer, showed out, looked damn good in the last chance Olympic qualifiers for the Bahamas. They didn't qualify for the Olympics, but he was very good on a team with Buddy Hield, DeAndre Ayton. He was really a standout. So far this year, 15 points, 5 boards, 3 assists, 56% true shooting. Not great for a guy who, you want to be a high leverage college prospect going into the NBA, but that's improved over the course of the season. He's at 35.5% from 3. A couple months ago, he was in the 20s. So a really nice run of shooting from him as well. Nice little heater over the last, I think really since conference play started, I think is kind of the turning point, which is great. And look, I just think, and we're going to talk about this with Maluach as well. Like Edgecombe to me, he just is the kind of guy when you watch him, when you check out his games, when you look at the highlights, when you watch the film, like he just pops off the screen as an athlete more than anybody around him. This kind of is true for Khaman Maluach as well. But I think especially with Edgecombe, because he's 6'5", just like the leaping ability, the quick twitch, the burst, the first step, it's really tantalizing and gives you a lot of like baseline for what he can kind of layer in on top of all of that athleticism. I also think he's like a pretty smart, heady player. He seems to have good feel, good instincts, defensively in particular. Like, you watch some of the work he's done, and shout out to, look, again, with the draft, I'm very often leaning on people whose opinions I trust and then kind of synthesizing what they all say and kind of coming up with my own takes at the end of kind of consuming a lot of stuff. Some of my favorites, Keandre over at Hoop Intellect. We'll get him on the podcast again sometime. He was on last year. He's great. Ben Pfeiffer, a fantastic follow on the internet, whether it's YouTube, Blue Sky, whatever. He does great stuff covering the draft as well. We'll talk about Ben and his piece, his video essay on Khaman Maluach come up in a sec here. But when it comes to Edgecombe, like, yeah, when you watch through all of this stuff, the athleticism and the like, again, the instincts defensively, where it's not just that he's leaning on being a super like fast twitch athlete. He just like kind of has a sense for how the possession's developing, where to rotate to, when to jump a passing lane, when to not. Like there's a lot to like there. He's like a chase down block monster. That's the athleticism coming into play, the motor, the energy he brings to the table. All that's really exciting stuff. To me, he feels at worst like a really, really good sort of like complementary starter type whose defense is so good that the offense doesn't even need to be that great. But I do think there is some juice with the offense there as well, just because he's so damn athletic. Also, a real important notch in favor of VJ Edgecombe. The dude dunks everything. He is a dunk monster. He might be a future dunk contest winner. He might end up going down as one of the best in-game dunkers in the NBA once he makes it there. That's the kind of thing that he brings to the table that makes me go, wee, because I love dudes who dunk. I love guards who slash and yam on dudes who are taller than them. It's all just like catnip for me. I'm super in on him being this like super athletic slasher, driver, dunk on people's heads dude who also is a fantastic defender. The real upside question with him comes with his self-creation. If you go and watch, like there are some times where it looks a little hairy. He's not great with the handle. He's not great when it comes to just sort of like making decisions once he gets into the paint on how to score over guys. I think Keandre over at Hoop Intellect kind of noted in his rundown of Edgecombe recently that like he tries to score over guys as opposed to around too often, and it gets him into some trouble. He kind of has these like off balance attempts at finishes. He'll get too deep positions sometimes where he's like driven like straight under the basket, and all of a sudden there's just like a gigantic guy kind of folded over top of him, and he can't really make anything happen there. The handle needs a lot of work. Like, yeah, the self-creation stuff, there's not a lot of pull-up juice to him right now. A lot of his three-point shooting is catch and shoot, which, hey, is great. Like, that's a thing the Raptors could use. The Raptors have a lot of guys who can do stuff with the ball in their hands quickly. Ingram, Barnes. Maybe you'd love to go and find yourself a lead, no doubt, offensive engine type, but that just might not be attainable for the Raptors at number 5. There are not that many guys in the world who are, no doubt, you give the ball to him and he can be the engine of a top 10 offense for you. There are like maybe 5 to 10 guys alive who are like that. And I think drafting at 5th overall or 4th overall, wherever Edgecombe goes, I think the likelihood you're getting one of those guys is pretty low. And so I don't think that can be the driving force of your decision-making, right? You can't just be like, well, we got to take the guy with the highest upside to be a potential engine one day, because odds are he's just not going to get there. And so you got to look at the other tools and how they fit. And Edgecombe is a guy who could work off the ball with quickly Ingram and Scotty kind of carrying the day offensively with their creation. I think there's a lot for Edgecombe to do. I also think he could be a guy who helps reinvigorate the once storied and once renowned Raptors transition offense, which has sucked this year. It's been a bottom 10 transition attack all year. Edgecombe is just lightning in the open court. That's where so many of his very rad dunks happen. I love the sort of idea of like him and Scotty Barnes working in concert in transition. RJ Barrett obviously has been a bull in transition as well. it's, like the Raptors getting back to the glory days of when they had Pascal Siakam, who was like the best transition player in basketball. Not saying Edgecombe will be that, but just more dudes who can really make teams hurt on the run, especially for a guy like Edgecombe who does so much to force turnovers and grab steals for himself, hawk passing lanes, like, deflections, things like that. Having a guy who's that good in transition, who himself is so responsible for so many transition opportunities. You couple that with Scotty Barnes being a monster of defensive, highlights and counting stats and blocks and steals and all of that. And I think that's the recipe for a team that, maybe isn't like the greatest in the half court, but has enough to be all right in the half court that can then supplement that by being an excellent, excellent transition team. That's kind of what they were going for last year when they had Pascal on the team. They just also had Dennis Schroeder running point, and so it was never really going to be a good offense in the half court. I think this version of the team quickly, Barrett / Edgecombe, whoever, will get into that sort of, hodgepodge of dudes at the two in a sec. But, Ingram, Scotty, Pirtle, I think there's enough juice there to be a good half court offense. Not great, but like middle of the pack. And then if you add a transition, like just like a lightning bolt, like Edgecombe, then all of a sudden you can kind of balance things out and maybe flirt with a top 10 offense because you're just so good on the run. We should talk about how Edgecombe would complicate the picture, maybe more than any potential guy in the top 5. Ace Bailey, I think, that's a guy you can kind of play at the 3 or the 4, maybe even the 5 down the line because he's so big. He's 6'10". Like, I think you could run some pretty interesting lineups with him as essentially your spacing big. Super into Ace Bailey as like this sort of two-way 3-and-D, shot blocking, front court, multi-positional dude. We'll get into Ace Bailey a little bit more as we go forward through the draft process as well. Also, not the last time we'll talk about Edgecombe, surely. But if you have Edgecombe, it does make the 2-guard spot kind of a logjam, right? You've got RJ Barrett, you've got Grady Dick, you got Jacoby Walter. Ochai Agbaji you can probably classify as a 3, and so we'll do that for now for argument's sake. But like instantly, if you draft Edgecombe, I think he becomes your sort of, they've already invested a lot, obviously, in Grady Dick, and I think they believe a lot in him. They've called him untouchable before. We know that Jacoby Walter is someone who I really like. I'm super in on, but I think Edgecombe kind of walks in and is the sort of most important prospect they have at the position. And if you have 4 guys who have like a credible case to get real minutes at the 2, I do wonder if that is maybe the guy who most encourages a trade of RJ Barrett this summer. Again, Dylan Harper, I think, has like point guard and 2-guard capabilities. You can probably coexist there and just like go full talent mode, have him maybe like run as a backup point guard type in lineups with Jamal Shed, stuff like that. There are ways to stagger it. There are ways to play Barrett with Harper. If you're going to bring quickly, maybe quickly kind of goes to the bench early and run second units, and you have Harper plus Barrett plus Ingram, Scotty, Pirtle. Like, there are ways to make that all work with Dylan Harper. Cooper Flag, I just think, kind of bolsters the front court similarly to Ace Bailey, and Khaman Maluach doesn't really affect the 2-guard situation at all. But if you draft Edgecombe, I think that does kind of make a bit of a pressure point there. The need to kind of do something to free things up, whether it's a trade of a Grady Dick or a Jacoby Walter to rebalance to a different position, or RJ Barrett himself, as we talked about yesterday and have talked about a lot since the Ingram trade, how interesting his sort of next 6 months will be on and off the court. Like, that's a thing to consider here with Edgecombe. Like, that's the thing that's like, he's like the least obvious guy to just kind of slot into the team and sort of give him a runway to minutes, right? Just because there's so much going on at that position for the team. That said, I don't think that stops you. If he's there and you think he's the best guy, you just take him because he's a very cool player with, I think, legitimate 2-way upside. And yeah, I don't think he ever really becomes like an offensive engine. Like, the creation stuff is a pretty long ways away, but he's also young, and he was also the main guy for the Bahamas last year. And so, like, maybe that's something. Maybe he can kind of grow into it and kind of, maybe there's some more sort of lead creator type upside there if he can refine the handle. He's still, again, very young. These things take time, and prospects are never what we think they are until they're fully fledged out. And so I think you take it, the upside play just with the athleticism alone, if he's there at 4 or 5 for you. We'll come back on the other side. We're going to get into Khaman Maluach, who I'm so in on, who I think I'm like, there's a chance he's number 3 for me by the time we get to the end of this pre-draft cycle. He rules. We'll tell you why coming up in just a sec. Today's show is brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I've talked a lot about the happiness hedge, and like it's like my preferred and kind of only way to wager on sports. I didn't do this last night for the Canada USA game, but I hope a lot of our American listeners did because they lost. Had they bet money on Canada to win, they would have had their wounds eased a little bit by the fact that they won some scratch out of the deal. If you didn't, ha 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 ha, losers. Wow, that was an awesome game. Either way, there's all sorts of stuff over on FanDuel for you to peruse. You got NBA action every single night. NHL, long-term futures, things like that. You can go and check it out right now. They're very easy to use, user-friendly app. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Wrapping it up here, talking about one of my increasingly favorite prospects in the draft, and a guy who, if the Raptors get him, I get real excited. We're talking Khaman Maluach, who is the 7'2", 7'6" wingspan having big man for Duke, plays with Cooper Flag, 18 years old, won't turn 19 until September, so a very young player in this draft class as well, and just a gigantic freaking human. He's enormous, 7'2", 7'6" wingspan, like I said. He's just everywhere because that's just what happens when you're that large on a basketball court where there's a finite amount of space. He's awesome. So far this season, the numbers aren't going to pop off the screen. He's only playing 20 minutes a game. I don't think this is one of those things where, like say, for example, with Donovan Clingan last year at UConn, like that was a constant thing of concern was, can he play enough minutes? Can he stay on the floor? Can the body like withstand it? I think with Maluach, it's probably more just like he's 18 and kind of in his first full long season of playing high level basketball. And they're probably just trying not to overexpose him. That's just my read on things. But hey, maybe that becomes an issue. Either way, like if you draft him, you can give him some time to build up and kind of, level up the length you can give him within given games because he won't be asked to start from day one. But over the course of this season, again, he's playing about 20 minutes a game. He's averaging over the course of per 40 minutes, if we're going to do that, because that's a good way with college with the sort of variable minutes that these guys play. But per 40 minutes, Khaman Maluach, 16 points, 12 rebounds, 2 boards, and he has a 76.6% field goal percentage at the rim. Sorry, from 2-point range, not just at the rim, just from 2. He's insane. He's got a true shooting percentage in the 70s. It's nuts. He hits everything. He dunks everything. He's got nice little touch on little push shots and stuff around the rim as well. I'm not sitting here saying that he's going to become some kind of Brook Lopez 3-point bombing big man or anything like that, but he's a 74% free throw shooter. And again, he's 18 years old and he's got some nice touch. I think there is potentially some shooting upside to look at there with him. He's 2 of 10 from downtown this season for Duke. Not taking him a ton, but taking 10 of them is interesting. And again, I think the touch is something to be worked with for a guy who is not going to be 19 until September when he's just gearing up for his first NBA season. And like, that's all the offensive stuff. The reason you draft Khaman Maluach is the defense. He is awesome. He is, to me, like the most modern defensive big you could possibly hope for. The league is huge now. The league is skewing bigger every year because it's the sport where talls succeed. And as more tall guys get skill sets that match the sort of modern NBA's need for skill, like you're just going to need guys who can go toe to toe with the Wembys of the world, the Chet Holmgrens of the world, and having just someone who's that large, who's that mobile as well. This is the thing with Maluach. You envision a 7'2" big man with a 7'6" wingspan and think, oh, that guy's probably pretty lumbering and slow, right? Probably doesn't cover ground great. Maybe you're thinking like Zach Edey, for example, a guy who I'm dubious that he's going to be like a high-level playoff performer just because I think the foot speed could be a problem. I don't think that's going to be an issue with Maluach. He covers so much ground on like every defensive possession. I talked about Ben Pfeiffer, his recent breakdown of Khaman Maluach. Go look it up. Just search Ben Pfeiffer, Khaman Maluach on YouTube. You'll find it. It's great. And it just highlights the incredible ground coverage this dude gets where he can track out to the perimeter. Even if he gets beaten off the bounce, he's just so long. Those big bounding strides take up so much space when he makes them. He can recover in time to contest stuff at the rim. He can play in all kinds of different pick and roll coverages. He's probably a guy who'll be able to switch at times as well. Maybe not all the time. Maybe it's not his preferred scheme, but I do think he's going to be an extremely scheme versatile player. And look, I know we always think about like you got to go high upside when you draft. You're the top of the draft. You got to go with the highest upside play. And I think with Maluach, like, yeah, it's possible he just becomes like, your classic, screen and dive big man on offense who doesn't have a ton of range and, is kind of doing the Jakob Pertl thing, just a little more dunky, a little bigger. The sort of, like actually the guy who comes to mind for me when I watch him is Tyson Chandler quite a bit. Like, and Tyson Chandler, former defensive player of the year, the second best player on a championship team. Like that's upside to me, even if it's not your classic, 25 point a game dude, like that is upside. If you can be Rudy Gobert, which I'm not saying he's Rudy Gobert, but like maybe he can kind of be Rudy Gobert, like that is upside to me. If you can be like one of the most elite defensive big men in the NBA, that is a different kind of upside, but it's upside. And I think in particular, the upside from drafting Maluach comes with what it means for the entire team. I think if you draft Maluach and pair him long term next to Scotty Barnes, that is so much length, that is so much mobility between those two guys. I think it gives you a pathway to being like an elite top 5 defense in the NBA just by having those two guys alone. You put those two dudes together, you have them as your 4-5 of the long. Obviously, Pirtle's the starter for the next little bit. You pay Maluach his rookie scale, you're paying 28, 30 million bucks for like a very good platoon of centers for the next couple of years until Maluach maybe grows into it when Pirtle's done with the Raptors. That's a pretty good way to go about things as far as bringing the development along. But once you get there, once you get to that point where Maluach is your starter, I think just the defensive possibilities with him and Scotty Barnes are super interesting. And the things you can do with the rest of your lineup become that much more interesting as well. You can probably make Grady Dick a way more viable high leverage player just by having Barnes and Maluach as the two guys at the back end, because they're going to fix everything. It's very similar. Someone made this point in the Locked On Raptors Discord. I can't remember who, but thanks to whoever did it. Might have been our pal Stago, might have been our pal Ben, whatever it was, whoever, like the point stands, like the Cleveland Cavaliers have shown they can kind of, this is the model, right? Just two absolute trees, two absolute monsters in at your 4 and 5 can make a lot of things possible offensively with your other players. And the Raptors wouldn't be rolling out 2 6'3" guards, right? Like they'd be rolling out quickly as their point guard. Ingram's there as your wing with, again, the length there, the 7'3" wingspan of Ingram with the 7'3", 7'4" wingspan of Barnes and the 7'6" wingspan of Maluach. Like, good luck, man. Good luck scoring on that team. So even while Maluach might not have like, super duper Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren level upside as an individual player, the upside he could bring to the team by giving them a pathway to be a top 5 defense in the NBA, like that is, I think, worth its weight in gold if you're going to go and try to target him. Obviously, again, it's going to take some time. He's got a lot of refinement to do on the offensive end. He's got to figure out how to be more than just a lobs guy, surely. And he's got to figure out those little intricacies, right? What Jakob Pertl does so well as a guy who doesn't shoot is still find ways to create space because he's a great screener. He can find those little pockets and, create little outlets for guys within close quarters. Like that's the type of stuff, if you're not a shooter, you have to get very good at, and that's going to take some time for Maluach, surely. But man, the defensive stuff with him is so exciting. And if he can ever have any kind of stretch to his game, if he can be someone who can knock down a couple perfunctory threes a game, boy, oh boy, you're looking at one of the best big men in the NBA. And even if he doesn't get there, he is still in that sort of like Derek Lively tier of dudes you're more than happy to have on the floor as like a team with high ambitions as your starting center because of what he brings to you for you defensively. And so, yeah, I'm very in. He's very raw. He's 18 years old. He doesn't have a lot of passing juice or anything like that. But a defender like that who can just like play modern defense in all the different shapes and sizes that modern defense requires, I'm super in, man. Come on, Maluach. I think I have him right now. Him and Edgecombe is tough. I go back and forth. I'd probably have Edgecombe just a little higher on account of all the dunks. But like those guys to me round up my top 5 right now. And there's a very real chance Maluach for me is like number 3 by the time this is all said and done. I think the defensive upside of him and Scotty Barnes is so nasty, so tantalizing. It's hard for me to not want to see that in the flesh come next season. We're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for rocking with the show. We'll be back again on Monday to talk about a return to basketball games over the weekend. The Raptors take on the Heat and I think the Suns on Sunday. So we'll have that broken down for you on Monday. Monday is also the Toronto Raptors media game. So Tuesday, we might have a kind of a dumb, fun episode breaking down all the media folks you know and loves games. That'll be very fun. Busy week next week. They're back to games, all that stuff. We'll continue with draft coverage. Lots to come. Thank you so much for rocking with the show. We will talk to you again very soon. Have a wonderful weekend. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, all that good stuff. Newsletter, Discord. You know the deal by now. Thank you for rocking with the show. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Such a cold streak. It's pathetic.